Welcome to Introduction to Career Assessments. My name is Megan Miley. Today we're going to be talking about evaluating abilities, aptitudes, knowledge, and or skills in the career development setting. First off, I want to talk about different terms and terminology around evaluation. The first one we're going to use is assessments, and we use this mostly in this course a lot because assessments is really an umbrella term meaning a systematic approach to gathering information for evaluation. The second term used often is test. Test indicates a science-based set of questions for evaluation. The third term is inventory. An inventory is a listing of questions for evaluation. And lastly is the term instrument. Instrument is a tool or device designed to carefully evaluate. So all of these terms sometimes are used interchangeably, but they do not mean the same thing, and I think it's important for us to know that and use the correct terminology with our clients, especially using the term test can connotate a right or wrong answer, and a lot of the inventories and instruments we use in an assessment context do not necessarily mean a right or wrong answer. All right, we're going to talk about the different uses of career assessments. Primarily for career counseling and coaching, we focus on exploration, decision making, and development. But I do want to make you aware of recruitment, onboarding, and retainment issues when we're talking about assessments. So first off, exploration is helping clients to understand and identify their skills, interests, values, personality preferences to help them identify their strengths, challenges, and needs. That's probably the one we will use mostly with our clients. Making decisions, assessments that help clients identify their own decision-making styles and basically to become better informed about their decisions. Third is development, helping clients to identify their own learning style, their educational and training needs and goals. The last three there, the recruitment, onboarding, and retainment, are assessments used primarily by employers and human resource professionals as they're hiring and training and attempting to retain employees so that they can, managers can best support employees as they make their jobs as satisfying and productive as possible. So we probably won't be using those as much as career counselors and coaches, but I do want to make you aware of those types of assessments. Two different ways different types of assessments we will be using in this course are formal and informal assessments. We want to understand the difference, the shortfalls for both, and the pros and cons basically for both kinds. For formal assessments, they are objective, science-based, standardized, and structured, while informal assessments tend to be subjective, not science-based, not standardized or structured. Formal assessments tend to cost more versus an informal assessment costs less. Formal assessments are more difficult to customize because a lot of time and money has gone into creating the assessments to standardize them, so they're not as easily customized as an informal assessment. The formal assessment may require special training to administer and interpret, while the informal assessment does not usually require special training. And however, interpreting them can be a little more difficult because you really have to be very thoughtful about your interpretation and base it on careful observation of the client in regards to information you've gathered beforehand and as you're sitting doing the interpretation. It just takes a little more expertise to interpret sometimes. And lastly, formal assessments are typically referred to as inventories and tests, whereas an informal assessment can be a card sort, worksheets, checklists, guided imagery, interviews, or even group discussions. When we use the term science-based assessments for formal assessments, what we're talking about are tests typically that are objective, meaning that they are standardized, they're science-based, standardized for interpretation. So you're not going to be subjective. You're not going to be adding as much of your own personal insight and interpretation. It's going to be much more standardized. You're going to follow a manual, probably some training as you interpret it. Validity is an important concept to really understand when you're using a science-based assessment, because it means that an assessment hopefully they have gathered enough information and data around it to prove that it is a valid assessment, and it refers to whether a test accurately measures what it was designed to measure. Does it really measure someone's interests, or does it measure something else? So we have to understand that an assessment has validity to be used. Reliability is an indication of whether the assessment provides the same results over and over time. Test and retest. So that one's important to make sure that you're using assessments that are reliable. Bias is an important term to really understand, and it refers to known and unknown assumptions, sometimes culturally based, in the content of the assessment or the sampling used in the population, and it can affect how much an instrument really does assist your personal client that you're working with. Because, for example, if an assessment was created in a language they don't know as well, or if it was sampled or normed against a population, a gender, race, age, socioeconomic status that's completely different than the client you're working with, the results may not have as much validity or be applicable to them. So basically, a science-based assessment or test is a standardized test administered and scored in a consistent or standard manner, and it can be replicated over and over, and is not prone to subjective interpretation. There are a number of different kinds of inventories that we use in career development. Interest inventories help clients understand and identify their interest themes. Abilities are an inventory set that help us understand a client's abilities and how they match the demands of certain occupations that a client is considering. Skill inventories really look at helping clients identify their own skill sets. Work values indicate, what underlying values influence a client's decision-making and career satisfaction. Personality inventories help clients understand and describe their preferences in a work setting. So it's important to understand what their preferences are. Using an assessment like the Myers-Briggs type indicator would really help a client understand, do they work best in an environment that has a lot of people interaction or minimal people interaction or somewhere in between. So their personality and where there's a good fit. And lastly, we have career beliefs, which help clients identify and understand barriers to their career development. So if they have the belief that, they have a certain type of training, and that's the only thing they can do with that training or education, that might be a barrier. So we can really help them identify what barriers are in the way, and then focus on perhaps instead of additional education, maybe they need exposure, such as informational interviewing or networking, or maybe even a training course that's not another degree. So career beliefs help us really pinpoint what is going on underneath a client's problems, or identify their needs. Factors to consider when you're using an assessment. You need to really understand what information is needed. What are you trying to understand? Are you trying to get at abilities or skills or values? What is the assessment going to be for? How much time is needed to administer it? If you have a half-hour appointment, you don't really want to fill up the entire appointment with an assessment and leave no time for interpretation. So you need to really think about how much time things are going to take. Difficulty level, is it an assessment that a client is going to be able to take, to read, that you can easily administer? If it's a computerized assessment, is that something they'll be comfortable with? You really need to think about what their needs are and their abilities. And then lastly, what are the training and credentials needed to administer that assessment? There are 3 different types of assessments, really, in that regard. There's level A, and those are instruments that require no special qualifications for administration. Level B are instruments that require a bachelor's degree in psychology, counseling, or a closely related field in addition to specialized training on that assessment. A Myers-Briggs type indicator, a strong interest inventory, those would be examples of level B assessments. And lastly, level C instruments require a graduate degree in psychology or education or another closely related field, and also require advanced training and specialized credentialing in the administration and interpretation of that test. CPI would be an example of that type of a test that needs, that is a level C. Potential errors. These are things we want to be on the lookout for as we use and interpret assessments. Insufficient preparation. We need to make sure that our clients know what to expect before, during, and after assessments, and what's the purpose of the assessment. What is the information we're gathering going to be used for? We really want to help them understand before they take the assessment what it's all about. We don't want to be too or over dependent on results and relying on the assessments too much. We need to also take into consideration that an assessment can only evaluate so much information, and we may need to use another assessment, or we may need to simply, be asking our own questions and taking in information that the client gives us in a narrative. Poor interpretation. Results really need to be clearly and thoroughly explained, and the client really needs to understand for an assessment to be helpful. And lastly, incorrect use. Assessments really need to be chosen, administered, scored, and interpreted correctly. So that's where the training of each and every assessment, especially those level B's and C's, need to come in. We want to talk about assessment procedures, and we just touched on that a little bit, but let's go in more depth here. When we are determining a client's career development needs, are we looking for information on exploration, decision making, training, or the recruitment, onboarding, and retainment? So, what is the purpose of the assessment? What do we need the assessment to help us gather information for? And secondly, we need to choose the appropriate assessment. Is it going to be an interest, abilities, skills, work values, personality, or career beliefs assessment? Thirdly, we need to prepare the client. We need to give them the name of the instrument, tell them about the types of questions, what to expect before, during, and after the assessment. They need to understand the purpose of the assessment and what information is gathered and how it'll be used and how it will not be used. We want to assure the client that it's not a test in that there are right or wrong answers. Most of these exploration and decision-making tests are not, inventories are not right or wrong answers. They're just helping to explain where the client is at. Sometimes some assessments, it's best to kind of go with a gut reaction and not think about a reaction or an answer too much. That may not be the instructions for all assessments, but I'm thinking about the Myers-Briggs in particular. That one, you tend to do better if you just kind of go with your initial reaction. So that's where the training, again, is really important with these assessments. Clients need to know how long the assessment will take, when and where and how they'll be taking the assessment, and how long it'll take for them to get the results back. And I caution you to be patient with clients who may ask the same questions over and over, especially if they are anxious. So we need to, let them know that this is not the only way that you're gathering information, and it's not about making any any particular judgments about them. It's an information gathering exercise. We want to administer the assessment and then, if necessary, remind the client, before administration, by phone or email, that they're going to be having the assessment in a day or two so that they can prepare and know where to show up or how to do it, if it's on the computer at home or if they need to go to a library or center. The fifth step is to have the assessment scored either by yourself or through an agency or staff, and make sure it's scored correctly. Be sure to review the results to make sure that you or someone else scored it correctly, and to familiarize yourself with the information gathered. You want to explain to the client when you're meeting and going over the interpretation the importance of not relying solely on the results of this assessment, but it's used to be a helpful tool as they're making their decisions. Interpret the results clearly and make sure your client thoroughly understands the results. Support the interpretation. Ask questions to ensure that the client finds this information helpful to their developmental process, and suggest next steps to further the use of this assessment in their process. The last step in assessment procedures is managing assessment records. It's really important that you can ensure a client that the assessment results are kept in a private, secure place, and that other staff members who will have access to it are allowed to, in case they do need to get it, but that only the trained individuals will be allowed access. And suggest that the client keep their assessment results in a place where they can find them. Perhaps in a portfolio for safekeeping, but make sure that if they're going on a job interview, they may not. It's to be careful about revealing the results to future employers. It may or may not be to their benefit that they share their results. So that's one you're really going to need to talk about and understand individually with a client. Lastly, and as we conclude here, we want to mention the things that we did talk about. We evaluated the different terminology of assessments, tests, instruments, and inventories. So we kind of differentiated those to better understand what we mean when we use those terms. We talked about the uses of career assessments: exploration, making decisions, development, recruitment, onboarding, and retainment. We talked about formal versus informal assessments, what makes up a science-based assessment. That standardization and statistical analysis really makes up a science-based assessment. The types of inventories, we talked about whether they be abilities, interests, skills, values, personality preferences, and career beliefs. Potential errors in using assessments, and then making sure that we sufficiently prepare, that we don't overdepend on results, that we interpret correctly, and that we make sure that the clients understand the limitations to the assessment. And lastly, we went over the assessment procedures and really understanding the best ways to use assessments with clients. I hope this has been helpful to you. And if you have any questions, be sure to simply place them in a posting, and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.